Okay, there we go.
There you go.
All right, hey.
Hi.
We are in week 5 of the Bible reading plan.
Yep.
And so that's from the end of Exodus to, I think when it finishes up at the end of this week, it'll be Leviticus 14.
All right.
If I remember right. Okay. And so today is what, February the 2nd, is that right?
Today's February 2nd.
Okay, great. So, we've got some questions here. You want to kick us off?
Sure. As I was reading the end of Exodus, I had a curiosity of if anywhere we learn why all the specifications the Lord gave for building the tabernacle. He gave specific colors, specific amount of rings, specific wood, all of those, and colors, all that stuff. So, do we read anywhere about that, or how do we know his purpose?
Yes. Okay. So, and then each time it says something along the lines of, and Moses did all that the Lord commanded.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing we take away from that, before I answer your question, is God told Moses, hey, I want you to do it exactly this way. And then Moses did all that the Lord commanded.
Right.
Like he did exactly that way. Okay. Where do I want to start on this? A really great, so you've heard me say this a ton of times, the best commentary on the Bible is
the Bible.
The Bible.
Yeah.
And so a place that I turn to a lot for Exodus and Leviticus is the book of Hebrews. And if we go to Hebrews, I'm going to Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Sometimes I have to go through them in order in my head.
To find them.
Hebrews.
In here?
Page 792 in my Bible, if that helps you.
Mine's 1,558 in my Bible.
All right, so in Hebrews, I think it's chapter 8, maybe. Talks about Jesus being seated in the right-hand throne of God for every... Now, if heaven were on earth, verse 4, he would be a priest. He would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. They serve a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. Okay? For Moses was about to erect the tent, and tabernacle, by the way, is just another word for tent. And the King James translators are, let's see, Geneva? Probably King. Anyway, the Old English translators picked the word tabernacle because that word used to just mean tent.
Okay.
We didn't update that language for like the NIV and some of these newer translations because it seemed kind of not holy enough to just call tabernacle a tent. But honestly, had they done it, they would have just said, and here's the tent of meeting. Okay, so but we use the word tabernacle, and really all it used to mean is tent. All right. Okay. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God, saying, see that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain. Right?
Right.
Okay. But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. All right? And then he goes on to talk about the covenant. And if we come down... So the author of Hebrews is saying exactly your question. He did it because he was building a model of something in heaven. And then we go on in chapter 9. Now, even the first covenant had regulations for worship and an earthly place of holiness, being tabernacle. For a tent was prepared, the first section in which were the lampstand and the table and the bread of the presence. It is called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was a second section called the most holy place, having the golden altar of incense and the ark of the covenant covered on all sides with gold, and which was a golden urn holding the manna, and Aaron's staff that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. Above it were the cherubim of glory, overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail, because, it's not around anymore. Okay. Right. These preparations having thus been made, verse 6, the priests go regularly into the first section, performing their ritual duties. Into the second, only the high priest goes, and he but once a year, not without taking blood, which he offers for himself, And so it goes on for a bit. But the reason I bring this up, so he talks about the holy place not yet opened as long as the first section is still standing, which is symbolic for the present age. And then it goes through and it talks about Christ being the more holy sacrifice, the more holy, more complete priest, the more complete, and it goes through and it talks about ultimately Christ being the more perfect high priest, more perfect sacrifice, more perfect tabernacle. And we see this in First John when it says, John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and tented among us. The word tent. Okay. And so what we read through here is we read through Hebrews, and I'm not going to kind of make our way through the whole book right now, but essentially what's going on, I feel pretty strongly, essentially what's going on is there is a temple, and we read about this in Revelation as well, there's a temple in heaven. And what Moses built was a scale model of a temple in heaven. And it's a shadow of the heavenly temple that we read about. And I think that the reason he had to get it so precise was because he was modeling it on something real.
Right, that makes sense.
And in order to make it a picture of that something real, it had to be just so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then, so we have a question that kind of goes along with that. Is the tabernacle symbolic of something?
Well, it sounds like it's actually a replica of something in heaven, of God's holy place.
Yes, so
But
absolutely
I'm
right.
not sure if I'm understanding the question.
It's a literal model, yes, of the
Yeah.
temple in heaven. I think it's also important that we remember that the tabernacle is symbolic of Christ himself. This is why God tells David, you won't build me a temple, I will build you a temple.
Right, because of Christ.
Because what the temple is, what the tabernacle was, it's a place where God meets with his people and where the people meet with God. And so the Shekinah glory, the cloud was literally there, but we read elsewhere in Scripture, the temple could not hold the fullness of God. So he doesn't dwell in the tabernacle. Okay. And so we've got a lot of symbolism in there, but ultimately when God tells David, your son will build me a temple, he's speaking of his son Jesus being the place where God and man meet. And when you look at the picture of it, there's only one door in the tabernacle. There's only one way in there. Right? And again, we see when Christ was crucified, there's a veil. Hebrews was telling us about the first place and then the second place. Right. And that veil that separated the Holy of Holies was ripped when Christ was crucified.
Because prior to that, commoners, like only the high priest was allowed.
Only the high priest could go in,
Holy
right?
of Holies, right?
Symbolizing no one could get to God unless they had done those,
right. Through the high priest, yeah.
Yep. All right. Tabernacle symbolic. We did that. Oh, in Leviticus, there is a question about the mom. And when she has kids and the purification time of a boy being 8 days and the purification time for a girl being 2 weeks. When she has a girl.
Okay, yeah.
And so the question then is, why does the purification time longer if someone has a girl than if they have a boy?
Well, that's a good question. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, nice. Well, we can throw out a few things. We can throw out, the idea has been pitched, well, because you're more sinful if you have a girl. That doesn't seem to hold.
No, because that's not anybody's choice. That's the Lord's.
Yeah. There's something about the. So my short answer is I don't know. It may very well be that there's some medical thing that's purifying, because what this purifying is from her flow of blood, and then so it's 8 for a boy and then 2 weeks for a girl, and something about her and then the other girl. I don't know. All I know is that one was longer than the other, and I think it's kind of we need to be careful of like
if the
putting
Bible
too much.
Doesn't speak to it.
Yeah, when the Bible's silent, we'll be silent. But in that same section, There is something I think that we can get out of that. Do you have that in front of you, what chapter that is?
I do not.
All right, Leviticus. Well, it's definitely between 1 and 14, because we're not... Cleansing of the leper. Yours says breakout's better than mine. Guilt offering, priest.
Sometimes these help too.
Motherhood. All right, chapter 12. Okay, so we're in chapter 12, and this is what I do want us to take away from this. When the days of her purification are complete, whether for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb, a year old for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering, and he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her. Then she shall be clean from the flow of blood. This is the law for her who bears a child. Okay, so they're supposed to bring what? A lamb and turtle dove. Mm-hmm. What did Mary bring? Do you remember?
I think she brought... I don't remember. No, I had it here. I could see the verse, but I lost it.
She brings a couple... we read in the New Testament, she doesn't bring a lamb. She brings a couple of birds.
Doves, yeah.
If we keep reading in Leviticus...
Yeah, I forgot that.
And if she cannot afford a lamb... Then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for burnt offering, the other for sin, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. All right, what does that tell us? That she couldn't afford a lamb.
She couldn't afford
right?
a
She
lamb.
couldn't
So
afford a
that's
lamb.
why Mary didn't bring them. Yes.
Right, because Mary couldn't afford a lamb.
Yep.
All right, and her purification time was 8 days.
8 days.
So 8 days after, she couldn't afford a lamb.
Right.
Okay, what does that tell us about our Christmas story? Remember what the wise men brought?
They brought it for her.
No, they brought gold,
Oh,
frankincense, and myrrh. You know this.
Right, yes.
So the wise men brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Myrrh.
So if they had brought a bunch of gold, frankincense, and myrrh between day 1 and day 8, she would have had to bring a lamb.
Right.
So what we know was that the wise men didn't get there till at least 8 days afterwards. Right? Because she couldn't afford a lamb.
Right. I'm not sure I'm tracking. I'm trying to...
Okay.
Yeah.
So Mary has a baby.
Yes.
8 days later, she's supposed to go bring a lamb and turtle dove.
Right.
But she can't afford a lamb.
Right.
All right. Now, if the wise men had gotten there while on the night she was having a baby, like all of our manger scenes show, then 8 days later, she would have taken the gold, frankincense, and myrrh,
So
sold it, bought a lamb.
To do that. I see what you're saying.
Okay.
She would have used her gifts to purchase a lamb if they had been...
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So we know that at least 8 days after Jesus was born, Mary was still poor.
Yes.
Right?
We can make that assumption.
That's
this,
okay.
Yeah.
Or Mary was disobedient. You pick.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So moving on. Why does... Okay, so here's a good question. I like this question. Why even bother? Why does Leviticus even matter?
So, I do not have a good memory with these things, but in our early days of dating, Adon, or our marriage, I guess, Adon taught through the Leviticus.
I don't know if we were married. Anyway, early in our...
Yeah, because you were training one of the boys
That's
to do it,
true.
Austin to do it. Yep.
Okay.
And so Adon and these couple young men taught through Leviticus, and Adon was so excited because it speaks a lot of the Lord in here, of Jesus in here. But I don't remember all the details. He's got that kind of brain. I do not. So why do we bother?
It's a good and it's a valid question. A lot of times, Leviticus is kind of where Bible reading plans go to die. New Christians, best of intentions, they're going to read the Bible. And I'm like, look, dude, start in John. The reason you start in John is because there's a gospel.
Yes.
Then they do Acts, right? They read the early church. Romans, they're off and running. And then by the time they get around to Genesis and Exodus, they kind of have the background for the story. And yet, well-meaning Christians, brand new babies. They're like, I'm going to start at the beginning of the book. They jump in Genesis, just to chapter 5, so-and-so begets so-and-so, and they just skim through all that. And they're going, and they hit the Exodus, and plagues, and war, and delivery, and it's awesome. And then they get to take the offal of the bull and put it on the blood in the altar. And when you have one lamb, and then he did exactly after then he took the bull and he took the blood and he did that. And now if you commit this sin, take the bull and take the blood. And after 9 chapters of that, people go, I'm just done.
Yeah.
So it's a valid question. And I would say this, hang out with us, stick with us. Next week's going to be awesome. I think Leviticus, I've told you this before. Leviticus is my favorite book of the whole Bible. My favorite book of the whole Bible. I think it could just as easily be entitled The Gospel According to Moses. Love it. And so in Leviticus, we and if you're really struggling, switch over, read the book of Hebrews real quick, and then read Leviticus again. It'll probably help you. We read about what a priest is. A priest is someone who speaks to God on behalf of people and people on behalf of God.
Right.
And all the Old Testament priests fell short, but we read of a high priest to come who's the absolute ideal of what those things were pointing to.
Yeah.
We read of sacrifices of slaughtering a bull or a goat and that bull paying the price for my sin. But yet the next time I sin, we have to sacrifice the bull again. But we read of a sacrifice to come, Jesus Christ, who is going to be the once and for all sacrifice. And we won't have to continually. We read of the tabernacle where God will meet with his people and people will meet with his God. And we read about Jesus who tented among us. And so I think that in one sense, I think we get a truer, clearer picture of Christ as we read through the book of Leviticus. And number 2, I think this is really cool. When we read through the book of Leviticus, some people read about, man, all the stuff that those people had to do to get forgiven. And kind of like we were speaking last week, when we read through this as New Covenant Christians, we read through all the things we don't have to do.
Praise the Lord.
You can't be grateful. It's kind of like when you take American teenagers on a mission trip to Guatemala and they come back and they go, I'm so thankful for all these things I took for granted.
Yeah.
As New Testament believers, when we see what they had to do and it still fell short, we can truly be thankful of what we don't have to do. We don't have to sacrifice bulls and goats and so there's and speaking of Jesus, we read about a guilt offering. He's our true and better sacrifice for guilt. We read about a different sin offering. He's our true and better sacrifice for when we sin. We read about a peace offering. He's our true and better sacrifice to have peace with the Lord. We read about a wave offering. And so everything that we go through, we read in Leviticus of all of the ways, of all of the pictures that Christ is the true and better picture of the sign that was fulfilled.
Are you excited about this part?
Love this book. Love this book. Probably doing the whole video series just for this section. Yeah. Let's see. We did that. We covered that. Any other questions?
I don't have any other questions at this point.
Okay. The showbread. Okay. So this past week I preached on the Sabbath, right? Jesus being the Lord of the Sabbath, and one of the things in there was about showbread. But next week we're going to get to the verse Jesus was quoted. The scribes were quoting about the showbread. So we're going to talk about the showbread next week.
All right. I look forward to it.
We're also so here's, because I don't want you to miss this while you're reading. Next week you're going to get in Leviticus chapter 16. You're going to talk about the high priest. Look at what he was wearing. Look at where he left his clothes. Everything about Leviticus 16, and remember that Jesus came to fulfill it as our high priest. So as you're reading about the high priest, the Day of Atonement, keep in your mind the crucifixion, Pontius Pilate, what they dressed him with, what they did with this, all of it. So as you're going through Leviticus 16, you read. Am I even mentioning the right chapter?
I'm not sure. You sound like you are. I mean,
I'm so confident.
You sound
I know.
confident about it.
Some of these videos I watch and I'm so confident, and then I go, "Oh, I can't believe I said that." Yes. So we're talking about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Keep in mind the work that Jesus did as you're reading about that, and absolutely love it. Love it.
All right.
All right. So a couple things. We are in the parsonage and we're loving that. If you are local and you want to jump in on this with us, you might notice we don't do. We read the Bible. We read the section every day,
Yeah.
but we don't do a ton of prep work for this. Really, our heart for this is if you and I saw each other in the marketplace, knowing that we're all on the same reading plan, and we said, "Hey, what'd you think about such and such? Wasn't that cool?" That's kind of how so we don't do a lot of prep work for this. It's really just Christians having coffee, talking about the Bible. If you go to Canyon Creek, or if you're local to Colton and you want to be a part of one of these videos, the only requirement I would say is that you're doing your daily readings, right? Otherwise, what would you talk about?
Yeah.
I guess. Reach out and we'll jump in, and maybe you'll get to, those of you in the video will watching the video, we'll get to know some more people.
Yep. And if you have any questions that you would like answered, you can text them to us or email them to us.
Yep.
Or ask us on Sunday. And even if it's a past reading, we're happy to talk about it in one of our next videos.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else?
I don't think so.
Sunday, we are going to be continuing on Mark chapter 3. The scribes come to Jesus and say, "You're demon possessed," and he says, "Let me tell you about the one sin that won't be forgiven." And so, if you're around, that's what we're doing Sunday. Pray for me as I get ready, and we'll talk about it then.
All right.
All right. Say bye.
Bye.